Crisis in the Gulf is next, followed by Larry King Live here on CNN.
De Anza College Community Services presents VIPs in Review, a 5-part subscription series of preeminent speakers and artists. This is your opportunity to hear in person Maury Povich of television's A Current Affair on January 11th, Marriott Hartley on February 1st, the Honorable Howard Baker on March 2nd, Nathan Sharansky on April 14th, and Steve Allen on May 24th. Single and subscription tickets are on sale now for the VIPs in Review at the Flint Center box office.
Tilly, take this down. Tapatu, Tipper, Taylor, Teasdale, Tate, Thompson, and Tillinghast entitle it The Matter of the Missing Moisture in the Santa Clara Valley. About the droughts hereabouts, sure, Sherlock shortages are shaping up. We keep coming up dry in the sky. Why? I haven't a clue. Do you? Period. Paragraph. Be on the lookout for likely leaks. Here's a tip. Fix the drip. Face it, waste it, and you'll regret it. You don't need to be Dick Tracy to figure that out. So seriously suspect the surest solution is to stick into a solid system of saving water. Sign it. Sincerely, Sam. P.S. Send check. Case closed.
Saving water, the new California lifestyle. It's catching on.
Sale now at Stevens Creek Toyota San Jose. Over 500 new Toyota cars and trucks on sale and great prices, best deals at the #1 Toyota sales leader in Northern California for the 4th year straight. Low prices on Camrys, hottest deals on tough Toyota trucks, 4Runners, Previas. Test drive the all-new 1991 Toyota Tercels. Next summer's best buys on 1991 Toyotas are here now at the New Year's sale. Stevens Creek Toyota San Jose.
Freddie.
Hi, Grandpa.
Sitting out here by yourself?
No, I'm talking to Shep.
Mind if I join you?
For young and old alike, a healthy, happy pet is a companion for life. See that your pet gets regular veterinary care. A public service message from the American Veterinary Medical Association.
This is CNN.
Saddam Hussein preaches to the converted. A Gulf War, he says, will be a battle of good versus evil, and the infidels, the U.S. and its allies, will lose. UN Secretary General Javier Perez de Cuellar arrives in the Middle East, carrying a 5-point plan for peace. He'll discuss it tomorrow in Baghdad with Saddam Hussein.
Losing my right to the floor, yes.
And in Washington, a debate of historic proportions. Should the U.S. attack Iraq? And if not, what should it do?
Will I be able to look at the parents, the wives, the husbands, and the children in the eye and say that their loved ones sacrificed their lives for a cause vital to the United States and that there was no other reasonable alternative?
From the CNN Center in Atlanta, I'm Dave Michaels, in for Lou Waters.
And in Washington, I'm Gene Randall, in for Bernard Shaw. This is our nightly special report, Crisis in the Gulf. Days away from possible war, Iraq's Saddam Hussein claims his country is ready. His speech before Muslim scholars was interrupted by applause and calls for him to, quote, defeat the infidels. CNN's Richard Blystone reports from Baghdad.
Addressing Muslim religious officials, President Saddam cast himself as one of the military religious leaders of Islamic history, and one who's about to go to war.
In short, my brothers, it is a showdown between the believers and infidels, between the true and untrue, between the believers and the good people and the evil and corrupted.
He denounced the Gulf presence of U.S. military women in shorts. Some Arabs have become slaves to the infidels, he said, obviously referring to the Arab allies, and it's necessary now to purify the family from within. Not an encouraging prelude to Saturday's visit by UN Secretary General Javier Perez de Cuellar, making a last try for a political settlement. One delegate to the Islamic conference, Louis Farrakhan, says he's not backing Saddam, but sees his appeal to downtrodden Arabs.
They feel humbled, they feel disgraced, they feel humiliated. And here comes a man who is an Arab, who is a Muslim, who dares to say no to President Bush, to the Security Council, and to 28 nations armed and ready to do battle.
In the Mideast, Saddam's invocation of Islam is not just a cynical retreat to religion as a last resort. It acknowledges a fact of life. Japanese Ambassador Kunio Katakura.
The nature of this regime is composed of three elements: military power, oil power, and religious power. So, well, this is the natural conclusion that now this sort of kind of religious jargons flying about.
And on a Baghdad street at the lottery ticket counter, there were plenty willing to gamble on Saddam.
We feel our Saddam Hussein is in the right position, and all the people in Iraq, they are loved him, and we don't care if it is happened war or not, because we are ready.
Saddam has been working, in his own way, to build a modern industrial state that is not ruled from the mosque. But ironically, it is while marching under the banner of Islam that he could see it all blown away. One factor is slightly neglected in trying to get Saddam to quit Kuwait without a fight: Arab pride. Back in late July, the Iraqi leader told U.S. Ambassador April Glaspie this, according to an Iraqi transcript: "Do not push us to the point where we cease to care. And when we feel that you want to injure our pride and take away the Iraqis' chance of a high standard of living, then we will cease to care, and death will be the choice for us." That from Saddam Hussein way back when the Gulf crisis was only a speck on the horizon. Richard Blystone, CNN, Baghdad.
Hopes for peace in the Middle East are now focused on one man, United Nations Secretary General Javier Perez de Cuellar. The Secretary General is in Amman, Jordan, a last stopover before he heads to Baghdad for talks tomorrow with Saddam Hussein. Although he denies he's carrying a peace plan, other diplomats say he is, and they say it would work like this. First, Iraq would have to withdraw from Kuwait. Now, if that happened, under the plan, Iraq would not be attacked. Coalition forces would withdraw. UN observers would oversee the withdrawal on both sides. A UN peacekeeping force would move into the region. And finally, the UN would call for an international conference on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Perez de Cuellar discussed the points of the plan today with European leaders in Geneva. It is not an official UN proposal. It's a list of ideas for discussion. Before he left Geneva today, the Secretary General acknowledged the possible UN peacekeeping role.
Well, of course, once there is a withdrawal, of course, I think that it would be appropriate for the United Nations to set up a peacekeeping mechanism, a mechanism of observation of the withdrawal of the Iraqi forces.
The Bush administration objects to any linkage to the Palestinian issue, but nonetheless is supportive of the Secretary General's peace initiative. President Bush says he still hopes a peaceful solution to the crisis can be worked out. And as CNN's Charles Bierbauer reports, the president has even been listening to ideas from Moscow.
President Bush got an early morning phone call from Soviet President Gorbachev with some ideas on how to convince Saddam Hussein to withdraw. Bush says he and Gorbachev are in sync.
I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I think I can do this without fear of contradiction. They are absolutely convinced that Saddam Hussein should get out of Kuwait in total compliance with the UN resolutions.
Bush says Gorbachev is thinking innovatively. Soviet Ambassador Alexander Besmertnik made 2 visits to the White House to explain a direct Soviet approach to Iraq. Administration sources say it would not lower the UN demands nor extend the January 15th deadline. U.S. officials have scant hope for the Soviet effort, but welcome it symbolically.
It is not simply Iraq versus the United States. It is Iraq, indeed, versus the whole world. I think that's the symbolism of Mr. Gorbachev's call.
But former President Jimmy Carter disagrees with the Bush claim of unanimity. Carter released a statement saying French and Soviet leaders have made it clear that they prefer a flexible negotiating approach instead of the delivery of ironclad ultimatums. Carter says Iraq's obduracy and U.S. quibbling over meeting dates and linkage have moved us slowly but inexorably toward military action. The White House declined to comment. U.S. officials, in fact, now call January 15th the brink of war. The president is looking for one more signal to Saddam Hussein.
I still feel that it would be very helpful to the last step for peace if the Congress would move and would support the so-called UN resolutions that are before the House now and will be before the Senate.
Bush invited more than 100 members of Congress to a White House breakfast and sales pitch. Many left still concerned.
What came across was the expectation that the war option will be used.
I'm reluctant to vote for giving him the power to use the military option. We ought to keep that as an option, but not use it as of 15th of January.
The Bush administration still encourages diplomatic efforts such as Gorbachev's or that of UN Secretary General Paris de Cuellar, but there is little optimism displayed here. White House spokesman Marlin Fitzwater says lots of people have lots of ideas, but none have worked so far. Charles Bierbauer, CNN, the White House.
Coming up, historic debate in the halls of Congress.
Party lines are crossed, and ideologies are less apparent as lawmakers decide whether or not to attack Iraq.
And what happens if there is war? Wolf Blitzer with an attack scenario later this hour.
When it was first introduced, Ford Taurus became a tremendous success. Naturally, this made Taurus a target for the competition. But while they've been taking aim, we've been making Taurus even better, with improvements in ride, handling, and performance, and safety advances like a driver's airbag and anti-lock brakes. Because everybody knows it's much harder to hit a moving target.
Have you driven a Ford lately?
To get rid of her gray, my wife can spend 40 minutes. But I discovered the 5-minute hair coloring.
The revolutionary discovery called Just for Men from the leader in men's hair coloring. Simply apply Just for Men and in 5 minutes shampoo out.
Gray is blended away. The look of my natural color is back in 5 minutes. That was me, and it won't fade or wash out.
My hair takes forever, but you look great in just 5 minutes.
The look of your natural color in just 5 minutes with Just for Men.
Did you know that you can send beautiful flowers like these anytime, anywhere to anyone by calling one phone number? The number is 1-800-FLOWERS because now more than 5,000 of America's finest florists have the same telephone number, 1-800-FLOWERS. All you need is a telephone and a major credit card. Just pick up the phone and call 1-800-FLOWERS. 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, toll free. 1-800-FLOWERS. We're America's florist.
Tonight, Ross Perot, the Texas billionaire who masterminded a daredevil Mideast escape, says he's got a plan for peace in the Middle East. Meet him tonight on Larry King Live, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Saturday on TBS. Get set for showtime! Simply incredible! The Hawks look to take a bite out of the Big Apple. Live at 7:35 Eastern on TBS, Saturday night.
Into the night, the House and Senate are continuing their Gulf crisis debate. The question at issue, go to war or wait? As CNN's Mary Tillotson reports, the answer is expected tomorrow.
Vice President Quayle posed with Americans who had been held hostage in Kuwait.
History will record how Congress conducts itself. Let us hope in this time of need that the Congress will be helpful to the President.
Defense Secretary Cheney lobbied Republican senators, and CIA officials told members of Congress in private what they've said before. Sanctions will not drive Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait immediately. All part of President Bush's effort to win what amounts to a congressional declaration of war against Iraq.
We should ask ourselves a fundamental question. Will I be able to look at the parents, the wives, the husbands, and the children in the eye and say that their loved ones sacrificed their lives for a cause vital to the United States and that there was no other reasonable alternative? Mr. President, at this time, I cannot.
Armed Services Committee Chairman Sam Nunn is one of those Democratic leaders arguing war is premature because the economic embargo could still force Iraq into retreat. So it was ironic anti-war demonstrators chose Nunn's floor speech to interrupt.
No blood for oil! No blood for oil!
11 11 demonstrators were arrested, and tight security on Capitol Hill got even tighter. Not because of the protesters, but worries about terrorism, which are growing, along with predictions that before the weekend is out, both houses will vote for war.
Even with the nightmare facing us, I deeply believe that the right choice is to proceed now and support our president.
What's the hurry? Impatience is no reason to go to war.
Saddam Hussein, if you don't leave Kuwait, we're going to attack, and we're going to attack in January.
If sanctions are not enough, then let us strike.
Senate Republicans now say as many as 9 Democrats may join them in authorizing the president to use military force in the Persian Gulf.
We all hope and pray that Saddam Hussein will understand that he must withdraw from Kuwait. The sponsors of this resolution, however, believe that we as a nation must stand together with the president if Saddam Hussein is to clearly and unequivocally get that message.
It now looks so certain that President Bush will get the Gulf resolution he wants that there was talk among Republicans on Capitol Hill of trying to get a Senate vote Friday night. That didn't materialize, but both houses of Congress are still scheduled to vote on Saturday. And both houses are expected to vote for war in the hopes that that will somehow lead to peace. Mary Tillotson, CNN, Capitol Hill.
The United States is ordering anti-terrorism precautions and warning of possible attacks. The State Department says there is evidence Iraqi-supported terrorists will strike worldwide in the event of a Gulf War. Screening procedures are being tightened at U.S. entry points. Anyone entering with Iraqi or Kuwaiti passports will be fingerprinted and photographed. Americans abroad are being advised to stay in touch with U.S. missions, and all Americans are urged to be alert for unusual activity. Americans in Israel are being advised by the State Department to leave.
Coming up, the U.S. Secretary of State is a hit with the troops. We'll have the latest on James Baker's day in the Mideast. And later, the president of Turkey, Iraq's neighbor to the north, says he doesn't consider Baker's Geneva talks a failure.
In American business, there is an award bestowed each year upon a select group of companies. Among the 10 recipients this year, AT&T. The award? The San Francisco Examiner's Golden Turkey for the worst advertising of 1990. We at MCI are glad to have this opportunity to give wider publicity for this award.
We can read in the Bible of his birth in a stable, his youth in Galilee, his ministry, trial, and death. Then of his glorious resurrection and ascension. But is nothing more written of him? Consider for a moment the glorious possibility that there is more written. Did he not speak to his disciples in the Holy Land of other sheep that would hear his voice? What of their record? The Book of Mormon, another testament of Jesus Christ, contains the account of his appearance in ancient America following his resurrection. A copy of this sacred record can be yours. It's a free gift when you call 1-800-453-7100. You have the Bible, but do you have the other testament of Jesus Christ? Call now, 1-800-453-7100.
Sunday on CNN World Report, a first-hand account of Iraqi atrocities from a former government insider. As war approaches, details of the brutal regime emerge. In Zimbabwe, the problem of alcoholism reaches new heights with the ease of producing potent homemade brews. And from Sri Lanka, colorful celebrations in the old tradition for a presidential anniversary on CNN World Report, 3 p.m. Eastern Sunday.
Secretary of State James Baker arrived in Cairo Friday for talks with Egypt's President Hosni Mubarak. Before leaving Saudi Arabia, Baker took time to visit U.S. troops there. And CNN World Affairs correspondent Ralph Begleiter says they liked what Baker said.
Months of pent-up tension of waiting for action in the Saudi desert erupted into cheers as Secretary of State James Baker appeared before American fighter pilots and their crews at an air base near Taif, Saudi Arabia. Some of the airmen and women told CNN before Baker's speech they're eager to know when they'll see action in the Gulf.
As the clock ticks down to midnight, January 15, I cannot give you an absolutely definitive answer, but I can tell you this: you will not have to wait much longer for an answer to that question.
Baker said the Bush administration thinks Iraq won't compromise until it's almost too late.
Saddam Hussein will wait until he is on the very brink before he moves. And our worry is that in his usual style, he will simply miscalculate where the brink is. And just so there is no misunderstanding whatsoever, let me be absolutely clear with all of you. We passed the brink at midnight on January 15th.
But the troops were equally enthusiastic about going home when Baker promised the U.S. has no plans for any permanent stationing of ground forces in the Gulf after the crisis. The Secretary of State saw the troops after visiting the Emir of Kuwait, still living in exile in Taif. Baker received assurances from the Emir, from the oil sheikh of Abu Dhabi, and from the leaders of Saudi Arabia of more oil money to pay for the U.S. military deployment in the Gulf. Aides say Baker also was assured by the Arabs they will stick with the alliance against Saddam, even if Iraq carries out its threat to involve Israel in any conflict. The troops in Saudi Arabia say they know the next week or two will offer nearly ideal conditions for an attack, not yet much rain, and a nearly moonless sky. Perhaps the most significant result of Baker's tour through the Gulf is agreement now among the key allies that taking military action against Iraq no longer requires further consultation. A senior aide to the Secretary of State says the Gulf states are now ready to receive nothing more than a notification from Washington. Ralph Begleiter, CNN, with the Secretary of State in Cairo.
The U.S. Navy finds the Persian Gulf booby-trapped with 15 mines. U.S. officials tell CNN the mines were deliberately planted by Iraq and they expect to find more. Extra precautions reportedly are being taken to protect U.S. ships in the area. The USS Midway moved into the Gulf today. The aircraft carrier and its battle group are now in position for war. 5 other U.S. aircraft carriers are in the region. 2 are in the Mediterranean, 2 are in the Red Sea, and the USS Ranger is heading to the Gulf of Oman from the Indian Ocean. Those carriers will be involved in the first military strike against Iraq. CNN's Pentagon correspondent Wolf Blitzer briefs us on the anatomy of the U.S. attack.
The U.S. attack begins from the air at night with F-117A stealth fighters based in Saudi Arabia. They're joined by F-15s and F-16s and, from a NATO base in Turkey, F-111 long-range strategic bombers. Flying from U.S. carriers, A-6 Intruders and F-14 Tomcats. Hundreds of planes flying thousands of sorties. Their first targets, Iraq's ballistic missile sites, especially those in the west. The mission, destroy Scud missiles Iraq has threatened to use against Israel. Then, Iraq's anti-aircraft missile batteries, especially around Baghdad and Basra near the Kuwaiti border. Their fire could endanger attacking U.S. aircraft, which will fly low to avoid radar. Also in Baghdad and Basra, laser and television-guided bomb and missile attacks against Iraq's command and control headquarters, including the Baghdad bunkers where Saddam Hussein will give orders.
We knock out their command and control and intelligence collecting capabilities right in the beginning. Since they use Soviet types of tactics and control and central control, then they're in deep trouble.
Other targets, Iraq's chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons plants. And finally, strikes against more than 100 Iraqi air bases, especially major ones near Baghdad and Basra. Also part of the air war, Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from the battleships Missouri and Wisconsin in the Persian Gulf. The unmanned missiles are programmed to strike targets deep inside Iraq. The U.S. strategy?
Basically, is to maximize use of air power and materiel and minimize the use of slugging it out on the ground where more people are going to be killed.
If 2 weeks or more of the air war failed to force the 540,000 Iraqi troops in and around Kuwait to surrender, Phase 2 of the operation begins, the ground war. But before sending infantry against Iraqi troops in Kuwait, U.S. B-52s stage carpet-bombing strikes to destroy landmines and other Iraqi fortifications along the Kuwaiti-Saudi border. And the Wisconsin and Missouri direct their huge 16-inch guns against the Iraqi defenses. Then, top-line M1A1 battle tanks attempt to outflank the Iraqi positions to cut off the Iraqi supply lines.
By making a 300 or 400 kilometer sweep around Kuwait, cutting off Kuwait completely to the point where the troops have no water, no food, no ammunition.
And from the east, 25,000 Marines storm the beaches of Kuwait, backed by close air support. Following that, if necessary, U.S. forces stage a direct attack against the Iraqi center. Only then, under cover of darkness, does the U.S. send in its infantry equipped with high-tech night vision equipment. Their mission, liberate Kuwait. Pentagon officials refuse to speculate about casualties on either side, but privately they acknowledge a degree of deliberate overkill that they say is designed to minimize U.S. killed and wounded and to win as quickly as possible. Wolf Blitzer, CNN, the Pentagon.
Millions of people around the world have discovered DD7.
I was skeptical. It seemed too good to be true, but I'm so glad I tried it.
Remember the guy with the ink? And the gal wearing the pizza? A little DD7, no ink stain. And it's a pizza takeout on that silk blouse. Magic.
I couldn't get the rust out of my sailing gear. DD7 had to be worth a try. Now, it's one of the crew.
You saw the red dye, ink, and iodine in our wash change our laundry from yellow to ich. And with a little DD7, we changed this to this and saved the laundry. DD7 is super concentrated but can be diluted to fill this. As a soak, it's incredible. Don't turn that shirt into dust rags. A little DD7 and it's new again. Even lift out stains from carpets and upholstery.
I love the new lemon fragrance.
Order DD7 today on this special repeat offer for $14.95 or save $10 and order 2 for $19.95. Now you see it. Now you don't.
When you know what it does, it pays to have it on hand.
Call toll-free 1-800-847-6300. Call from the U.S. or Canada. That's 1-800-847-6300. Or send $14.95 for 1 tube, or save $10 by sending $19.95 for 2 tubes, plus $4 shipping to DD7, P.O. Box 8950-NN, Buffalo Grove, Illinois, 60089.
Saturday, his country is in the middle. Among nations divided in the Persian Gulf, how will Jordan react if war breaks out? Jordan's King Hussein talks with CNN's Evans and Novak, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Saturday.
Operation Desert Shield cost the United States $10 billion through the end of 1990. But White House sources say the Allies will ultimately foot 80% of that bill. U.S. officials expect the cost of the troop buildup to jump over the coming months, and military expenses will skyrocket if shooting erupts. All this as the U.S. economy is turning sour. CNN's Francis Harton has more on the mathematics of the crisis.
Even if a shot is never fired, the cost of Operation Desert Shield will be high, and Americans will have to pay it.
I've asked for some estimates now as to what that price may be, but whatever it is, we're going to have to pay it.
The current estimate is $30 billion, roughly 1/10 of the Pentagon's annual budget. The money is paying for such things as air and sea lifts of troops and equipment. $2 billion is going to shippers, many of whom demanded and got premium rates because of the urgency. Food adds another $600 million to expenses, and $300 million has gone for medical supplies. Uniform makers have sewn up nearly $700 million since August. But if war breaks out, some people say the cost can't be calculated.
What the final bill would be for a shooting war
simply is beyond the ability of most people today to try and give a good estimate.
On Capitol Hill, they like to try.
We're talking about a rapidly escalating cost, about $2 billion a day. And the cost could go upwards of $70 or $80 billion for this coming fiscal year if there is a shooting war.
Part of the cost, weapons. Sparrow missiles retail for $178,000. Mavericks for $60,000. They're aimed and fired only once. Another factor in the calculus of war is the impact on the national economy, already hobbled by recession. By one estimate, higher oil prices have already cost Americans an extra $500 million since August. Many believe if Operation Desert Shield turns into Desert Sword, it would compound the national debt and knock the economy flat.
If you go to war and the price of oil goes up to $100 a barrel or supplies are cut off, that could have a devastating impact on the economy.
We could very easily run up an additional $100 billion deficit if we get into a shooting war in the Middle East. No question about it.
There's no telling what the Gulf crisis will ultimately cost the United States, but the Pentagon plans to ask Congress for an additional $30 billion next month. Francis Harden, CNN, Washington.
Still to come, a former CIA analyst and a psychiatrist join the discussion in our weekly status report.
And from Iraq's northern flank, Turkey's president, Turgut Özal, and his view of the crisis.
Next, Crisis in the Gulf continues, followed by Larry King Live here on CNN.
Getting to this year's big game in Tampa Bay is simple. Come down to Safeway, fill out an entry form at the Diet Pepsi display, and wait. Seriously, there's no catch. Well, maybe one. We have to pick your entry.
Win one of 10 trips to the World Championship game, only at Safeway.
The more complicated life gets, the harder Security Pacific works to simplify it. With checking that offers a monthly statement summarizing your savings, checking, and loans. It's just one of the ways we can make your life simpler. From our perspective, the simpler, the better. Simply Better checking. Only from Security Pacific. Simply better.
This is CNN.
Here's a check of the latest developments in the Gulf crisis. Saddam Hussein today vowed to defeat U.S.-led multinational forces in an Islamic holy war. He says the Gulf crisis is a showdown between good and evil, between infidels and believers. The Iraqi leader is urging radical Muslims to strike out at U.S. interests around the world if fighting breaks out in the Gulf. UN Secretary General Javier Perez de Cuellar is on his way to Baghdad in an effort to keep peace in the region. He met with European leaders in Geneva and gained support for an unofficial proposal to deploy United Nations troops in the region after Iraq withdraws its troops from Kuwait. Perez de Cuellar is in Amman, Jordan now. He's set to meet with Saddam Hussein tomorrow. In Washington, Congress is debating whether to give President Bush what he wants, the authority to unleash an attack against Iraq. Lawmakers label the decision a soul-wrencher. Congress begins voting tomorrow. Many congressional leaders say it appears the president will win the vote, but some say it's still too close to call.
Now our weekly status report on the Gulf crisis, a look at the major developments in the standoff with Iraq and how they could affect a U.S. decision for or against war. There was, of course, one dominant event this week, and that was in Geneva.
The first high-level U.S.-Iraqi talk since the invasion of Kuwait. But the meeting between Secretary of State James Baker and Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz turned out to be an exercise in futility.
Regrettably, ladies and gentlemen, I heard nothing today that, in over 6 hours, I heard nothing that suggested to me any Iraqi flexibility whatsoever on complying with the United Nations Security Council resolutions.
Aziz refused to accept President Bush's letter to Saddam Hussein.
And the reason is that the language in this letter is not compatible with the language that should be used in correspondence between heads of state.
President Bush called Geneva a total Iraqi stiff arm.
I can't misrepresent this to the American people. I am discouraged.
On his written message to Saddam Hussein,
The letter was not rude. The letter was direct.
By week's end, UN Secretary General Javier Perez de Cuellar was on his way to Baghdad. He called it his moral duty to work for a peaceful Gulf settlement. The European community said it too was still open to a meeting with Saddam Hussein. Meanwhile, Western governments began evacuating their embassies in Baghdad, and here in Washington, Congress began a full-scale debate on the Persian Gulf and the use of force.
It must not oppress.
Here to help sort out this week's dramatic events at the Persian Gulf crisis, Gerald Post, professor of political psychiatry at George Washington University, who's drawn a psychological profile of Saddam Hussein, and former CIA analyst Kenneth Katzman, a Middle East specialist. Mr. Katzman, the U.S. intelligence community, we're told, now believes that war is a virtual certainty. What do you think it is that offers the most convincing evidence?
Well, of course, I don't know quite what they're seeing, but what I could say is they're probably not seeing any evidence of preparations to pull out. You can't move a large force like that in a few days. I mean, if they're going to pull out, one would expect to see the movement of tent camps, tank transporters, possibly moving tank forces backward, some dismantling of command and control nodes, etc. And if one doesn't see these things, then you can say that they will not be able to pull out by the deadline.
Dr. Post, Secretary of State Baker in Saudi Arabia on Friday warned that Saddam Hussein would pass the brink at midnight, January 15th. How is he likely to react to language like that? You have drawn a psychological profile of this man.
Well, there's very much a contest here where Saddam doesn't want to capitulate, yet he, on the other hand, is not suicidal. And I do indeed expect him to go to the brink and believe there is still a possibility that he will, short of the brink, begin moves to change.
Well, President Bush said after the Geneva talks that Saddam Hussein is living under a delusion that force will not be used against him. Does that square with your profile?
Saddam will only leave, in my judgment, if he is certain that his power and honor will be destroyed unless he leaves. And he may well be interpreting the current debate in Congress as weakening the resolve behind President Bush.
Mr. Katzman, if there is a war, what should we expect from the Iraqi military? How long do you think Iraq can hold out, for instance?
Well, I don't think very long, quite frankly. I think their capabilities have been very far overestimated. When they fought Iran, they were fighting primarily a light infantry force on the Iranian side. The Iranians had very little artillery and armor and combat aircraft. Our firepower is going to be of such a magnitude that they've never even imagined before. Their command headquarters are going to be taken out in minutes. Their 50 tanks an hour are going to be taken out all around them. I believe that they will collapse fairly quickly when they see this type of assault.
Dr. Post, once in a war, what will it take to convince Saddam Hussein it is time to get out?
Once in a war, my concern is that at that point the rational calculator is replaced by Saddam in a corner with no way out, and at that point he can unleash really everything at his disposal. I think the rationality disappears once he feels backed in a corner and the bombs start dropping.
Mr. Katzman?
Well, I think Saddam's strategy, I think he's going to fight this battle if he fights like he fought Karbala 5 against Iran, which is a strategy of making the U.S. take massive casualties. It worked against Iran, it weakened Iran, and Iran eventually lost the war. I think he believes he can do that with the United States, make the U.S. take massive casualties, and make the U.S. back down.
Is Israel a wild card in this? If Israel is attacked, what happens to the coalition?
Well, I think it remains intact. I mean, we had the statement of President Mubarak of Egypt that any nation can respond if they're attacked. I don't see any major fracturing if Israel gets involved because Saddam is so isolated right now.
Dr. Post, we have this proliferation of last-ditch diplomatic efforts at a peaceful solution. Is Saddam Hussein any more likely to accept non-U.S. attempts at a peaceful solution, whether from Perez de Cuellar or the Europeans or the Arabs?
I think the more he sees this as not the United States versus Iraq, but that it is indeed the entire free world, I think this does have an impact upon him. He still does value his position as a respected world leader.
Mr. Katzman, do you have any doubts we're going to war?
Well, I don't see any evidence that we're not. I believe Saddam is very hard in his position. I think he believes he can actually win by making the U.S. take massive casualties.
And if there is going to be a war, is the United States better off hitting early?
I think you got to start with massive airstrikes, take out his production facilities, take out his ammo dumps, his command and control nodes, and then go on the ground. And I think it'll be a quick collapse on the Iraqi side.
Dr. Post, Saddam Hussein has been, after all, through these years, a survivor. Knowing that, how do you think he views the January 15th deadline?
I think there's a peculiar paradox that if it seems inevitable, if it is likely that war will break out, that is the greatest likelihood that war will not break out, because Saddam doesn't want to be destroyed. And the real question is one of miscalculation. I am convinced of the seriousness of President Bush's intent. I do not know if Saddam Hussein yet believes that.
What will convince him between now and the 15th that it's time to cut and run?
I believe what he is seeing amassed around him. I believe not only the United States, but the international posture, the forces of Germany and Italy moving into Turkey to protect our NATO allies. The entire picture is so overwhelming. This man is not a madman, but yet he has to preserve his honor somehow.
Dr. Post, thanks very much. And Mr. Katzman, thank you very much.
In tonight's Money Report, some traders thought oil prices in New York might soar today, but they guessed wrong. Light sweet crude closed down 42 cents a barrel for February delivery at $27.29. And Brent North Sea crude closed at $26.10 a barrel, down 10 cents. Many traders stayed away from the fray and volume was moderate. And a snowstorm in New York also took its toll as some traders left early. But in Paris, the energy watchdog agency for the West has announced a war plan under the contingency if war erupts. The 21 members of the International Energy Agency will release 2 million barrels of oil a day from government reserves.
A continuous commitment to improvement. One reason why the U.S. government awarded Cadillac the 1990 Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award, as demonstrated by the new 200-horsepower 4.9-liter V8 and electronically controlled transmission that not only generate more power, but deliver the highest highway mileage of any V8-powered luxury car. Another reason why the only way to travel is Cadillac style.
Cadillac style.
Kids don't worry about cholesterol, fat, or tropical oils, so you have to. That's why Hostess created light Twinkies and cream-filled cupcakes. 94% fat-free with no cholesterol or tropical oils. The sweet snacks you can say yes to.
Saturday, Congress battles war and peace. And in Baghdad, last-ditch diplomacy before the deadline. Congressman Newt Gingrich adds his thoughts to CNN's Capitol Gang, 7 p.m. Eastern, Saturday. Saturday, his country is in the middle. Among nations divided in the Persian Gulf, how will Jordan react if war breaks out? Jordan's King Hussein talks with CNN's Evans and Novak, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, Saturday.
On Thursday, President Turgut Özal of Turkey and CNN White House correspondent Frank Sesno discussed the Persian Gulf crisis. Among the points they covered, the failed Geneva talks, the role of the U.S. Congress, and the chances Saddam Hussein would withdraw from Kuwait before next Tuesday's deadline.
His is a nation in which East meets West, a crucial member of the NATO alliance. He is staring down a menace at very close range. Turkey's President Turgut Özal has told Saddam Hussein his troops must withdraw from Kuwait. Turkey's alliance with the West and the possibility of a second front against Iraq places Özal in conflict in Muslim Turkey and in danger from Iraq. His country sits on Iraq's northern border. For Turkey, war would be very close. Mr. President, Hosni Mubarak, President Mubarak of Egypt, told us in an interview that he found it shocking what took place in Geneva, and he now feels that the UN resolutions for Iraq to get out of Kuwait will have to be implemented by force. Do you agree with that?
I agree in general. I mean, I say the condition of war or probability of the war is up to 80%. There is only 20% chance war should be averted. With one condition, probably it will be higher if U.S. Congress support the President Bush overwhelmingly, then there is higher probability that war will be averted.
How closely is what Congress is doing in this country, in Washington, being watched in your part of the world?
I think there is a cultural difference between East and West. I have been in the United States almost 5 years. I know your manners. But probably in our society, many people doesn't know your manners. You discuss everything. I look at CNN, and there are positive, negative, or different opinions. This could be discussed in a democratic society. But there is a result, this or that. You come a conclusion at the end of it. But in the Eastern societies, this is not understood very well. When you have point of differences, they think you are not going to war, you are not going to make any move because there are objections in the society. Because in Iraq there is no objection. Nobody can speak against Saddam Hussein's wish.
How much optimism do you have for the mission to be undertaken by UN Secretary General Perez de Cuellar? What can and should he say in Baghdad?
Let me tell you, I don't think he will be in a position to negotiate on the United Nations Security Council decisions. You see, these decisions cannot be negotiated by the UN Secretary General. I don't think there is a UN Security Council decision authorizing Secretary General that you can negotiate that. I don't think so. Probably he will tell similar thing what Mr. Jim Baker told to Tariq Aziz.
Much was raised in the press conference, for example, with Tariq Aziz about the Iraqi position on the Palestinians and the possibility of an international conference. Do you believe in your heart that if the rest of the world said, yes, we will have an international conference on the Middle East, that Saddam Hussein would withdraw from Kuwait?
I am not very sure, because the question right here is not first of all, if Iraqis should openly told that we invaded Kuwait because of the Palestinian situation, maybe they would be right. But this has added later on, much later on. The invasion of Kuwait is not related to the Palestinian question. Everybody should know this. Now, but on the other hand, what I say, the world has to find a solution of the Palestinian question or Arab-Israeli conflict. Whether Saddam Hussein pulls out of Kuwait or he doesn't pull out of Kuwait. This is a separate subject, and it should be dealt after the crisis.
But you say that if the decision to withdraw from Kuwait is going to be made, it's going to be made in Baghdad, presumably by Saddam Hussein himself. If he wants a face-saving way out, and if that face-saving way out is an international conference on the Middle East, should Turkey, should the United States, should the anti-Iraq coalition go along with that?
I think generally speaking, we are after an international conference, but this should not be related to the withdrawal from Kuwait. I don't think, yes, Mr. Saddam Hussein should not be rewarded for that.
Mr. President, in Geneva, Tariq Aziz said that if there is war, Iraq absolutely will attack Israel. Israel says if they're attacked, they absolutely will respond. Do you think that if Israel is drawn into this conflict, that it will shatter the anti-Iraq coalition?
Only let me tell you, what way Iraq will attack to Israel, there is a possibility of ground attack. I don't think so. This is not possible. The other type of attack by airplanes, I don't think so. Israel Air Force can easily defend. The only attack is remain with missiles. This could be done. How much harm is going to make one or two missile attack? It will draw completely the Israel to the war, or Israel is going to move with all his forces available. Maybe retaliation will be from the Air Force or by missiles. If Israel does not move or invade Jordan or any other Arab country, then I don't think the coalition will be disrupted.
I understand. In your opinion, then, Israel has a right to retaliate as long as it is a proportionate retaliation? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, not much wider retaliation. I mean, the attack is a missile attack. He should make a missile attack or airplane attack. That's all.
Mr. President, let me move on to another subject that spins off of this notion of whether Israel gets drawn in, and that is whether Turkey will be drawn into this conflict. Is Turkey prepared, or do you believe that the Iraqis would launch a second front, or maybe even a third front, and in any way draw in Turkish forces?
Let me tell you, you see, there are, we have already taken necessary decision according to our constitution from the parliament. If Turkey is attacked, Turkey could be drawn into a war. But if it is not attacked, Turkey should not be in a war.
Excuse me, sir, are you saying then that under no circumstances would you permit a second front to be launched from Turkey short of an Iraqi attack upon Turkish soil?
Yes, let me tell you, there should be no possibility if there is no Iraqi attack to Turkey, then there will be no second front. But I don't know what will happen if there is a massive attack on Iraq and the collapse of Iraq. What happens afterwards? If we do not want to see that total territory of Iraq should be conserved.
There is the concern that if there is a diplomatic way found out of this, that leaves Saddam Hussein intact, it leaves his military as strong as ever. The threat remains, and in some way he may be politically emboldened. Is there just as great a threat in the long run to a diplomatic solution?
There is also, if he stays in power, there is also possibility of a danger, because let me tell you, especially after he gets some reward, then he will command most of the Arab countries, and that means also he is somewhat controlling the oil resources, and this will be probably more dangerous situation for whole region. We don't see it difficult for us, but it will be very, very difficult for the rest of the world, especially for importers, oil importers, Europe and Japan, and partly United States.
But you think the region could live with Saddam Hussein, even if his...
I don't know whether... No, I am not very sure of that. I mean, that depends upon how he's going to be in power, with some more reward or without reward. That's difficulty.
That is the difficulty in the...
I am talking mostly after him, together with all countries in the area, should have a very good economic cooperation.
President Ozal, you have watched Saddam Hussein at close range for a long time. You're familiar with his actions. You watched him in the Iran-Iraq War. What do you think he's going to do?
Two ways. One is he's going to pull out like he did with Iran. I think he lost what he gained in the 8-year war off. The second is the suicidal mission. Then even before the deadline, he may attack to Israel.
Do you think war now is inevitable? And how do you think the world will react to this?
Nobody likes wars. Wars, I think nobody wants war. We know that. But sometimes I always think when I study history, and you cannot escape the wars. Sometimes it became a necessity. Otherwise, if you do not make correction, then you may end up with much bigger wars.
It sounds like you're arguing in favor of one now.
Yeah, it may be.
Saturday night on CNN, we'll continue our series of interviews with prominent world officials. We'll talk with Yevgeny Primakov, Mikhail Gorbachev's personal envoy to the Middle East, at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Pacific.
Finally, tonight, as debate continues inside the United States Capitol, some moments from the day's arguments in the Senate and the House.
Cast, I believe that the question of war or peace lies in the hands of Saddam Hussein, which leads us inexorably to the question of the day. Yes or no on the resolution to give the power to the president to go to war. That's what we're facing here. Do we vote yes or no on that power to go to war? Mr. President, my answer is yes.
There's a misguided machismo mentality in America that says somehow or another, this is the John Wayne aspect, this is the way we ought to conduct foreign policy. We ought to be the bully boys. We ought to get out there and be the policemen of the world. Well, the fact is, folks, if we want to take that battle to every single conflict around this world, this country will not be morally bankrupt, but will be bankrupt economically as well within 6 months. And it's time for us to question the fundamental policies that George Bush has articulated that mean that he is asking the members of this chamber to commit themselves to war in just 4 days.
My colleagues, you've just heard from a member of the Kennedy family, of which we all respect. Let me read you a quote from another Kennedy on October 22nd, 1962. Quote, "My fellow citizens, let no one doubt that this is a difficult and dangerous effort on which we have set out. No one can have foreseen precisely what course it will take, but the greatest danger of all would be to do nothing. The 1930s taught us a clear lesson. Aggressive conduct, if allowed to go unchecked and unchallenged, ultimately leads to war." John F. Kennedy, a great American.
I've listened to my constituents for the last 2 days and to my president and to my colleagues who disagree with the president. I'm scared by the potential for American deaths, but I have concluded, after much soul searching, that we must support the president and the United Nations resolution and our allies in this venture who have voted for those resolutions.
When I was a young child, I heard on the Jack Armstrong report, radio show, that our country was at war. I didn't want to believe that. I was frightened. I was scared to death, thinking that war was going to be right outside my apartment building in which we were living at the time. And then when I became a high school person, the fellow that I was dating and all of our friends went to war in Korea. And then after that, as I became older and older and older, there was another war in Vietnam. Now, we call ourselves a peace-loving people in this country, and yet every decade or so we find ourselves shouldering the gun, marching off to war, jeopardizing the lives of 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old young men.
And that concludes this edition of Crisis in the Gulf. Thanks for being with us. In Washington, I'm Gene Randall. Have a good weekend, Dave.
Thank you, Gene. Same to you. I'm Dave Michaels, the CNN Center in Atlanta. Billionaire H. Ross Perot is the guest next on Larry King Live. Thanks for being with us.